Welcome to the Building Pathways to Healthy Minds podcast, where we share real world strategies to nurture children as they grow. I'm your host, Priscilla, and today we're asking the question, what if we tuned in to our tears, chills, and woes? And we're going to dive into the magic of childhood wonder with the author of Raising Awe Seekers: How the Science of Wonder Helps Our Kids Thrive, Deborah Farmer Chris. From slowing down time, yes, it is possible, to embracing curiosity like it's your kid's job. We talked about the 4 powerful tenets that reframe how we parent and teach. This conversation reminds us that raising thriving kids doesn't require grand gestures. It's about pausing to look at stars, embracing the awe in everyday moments, and turning card games into core memories. I wholeheartedly enjoyed this book, and I loved talking to Deborah, who felt a bit like a kindred spirit by the time I finished reading. So let me tell you a little bit more about her. Deborah Farmer Chris is the author of the I See You board book series and the All the Time picture book series. She's worked for CNN, PBS Kids, NPR's Mind Shift, The Washington Post, the Boston Globe magazine, and Oprah Daily. Deborah has a double major from Boston University in English Lit and elementary education, as well as a master's of education in counseling psychology from Rutgers University. But first and foremost, she has an educator and mom's heart, and her book is warm and genuine like her, and also full of practical tools you can help your children see the awe in the world and live with gratitude. Deborah even took a few moments before our podcast to talk to my daughter about one of her favorite shows, Carl the Collector, that Deborah is an advisor for. So relax, grab some coffee, enjoy your trip, and discover some practical tools for seeing and cultivating awe for yourself and your children. It's going to be awesome. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome.
Thank you.
Oh, man. So you are in Boston currently, right?
Yeah, just outside of Boston. So
Okay.
it's a sleepy suburb about 30 minutes out.
It's beautiful up there. I've only been a couple times,
It
but
is
it's beautiful.
beautiful. I am looking out my window right now, and my neighbor's daffodils always come up about 2 weeks before mine. I don't know what he does, but I am grateful because they are like the harbinger of spring in New
Oh.
England while I'm waiting for my pokey little ones to poke up. So
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, so let's get into the book. I have so many notes that I'm afraid we're not going to get through them all. But I want to start. I have there were like these the very beginning of the book. There were kind of these 4 tenets that you talked about. That you said read the book kind of through this lens, and we'll go through them throughout the book. But I kind of wanted to start with them, and they were slow down childhood,
Mhm.
embrace PDF. I loved that. Um, Practice radical curiosity and become an awe seeker yourself. So I was hoping we could break that down just a little bit and give parents and educators just some kind of tangible tools on how to do those things, because they're big concepts, right? So talk a little bit about slowing down childhood. What does that mean?
So, I really pulled these 4 out. I taught for 20 years. I've been in the world of parent education for another 15. And so people always ask, like, what's your advice? And the truth is that there's so many ways to parent. Like, I'm not a person for giving prescriptive advice at
Yeah.
all. That's not who I am. But when I think about the big trends of what's just healthy for kids to help them thrive, one of those is slowing down childhood, and by that I mean we live in a really high pressured culture, one that really prioritizes achievement and success, whatever that means.
Mhm.
And so, I think very often parents feel this need to, at least there's a wide swath of parents that feel the need to sign their kids up for these, to do things just right, to they're always kind of worried in their heads, is there too much screen time? Is there not enough of this? Is there too much of this? What's the calculus? And I think sometimes it's about taking the deep breath and saying, downtime is actually really good for our kids.
Yeah.
And as the preeminent awe researcher told me, Dr. Keltner, you find awe by slowing down. You find it by wandering, by taking a walk with no aim, without your device, and just looking
Hmm.
around. And I actually think this slowing down is more of a thing that parents have to think about than kids, because if you ever spend time with a 4-year-old, they're in no hurry most of the time. Like,
Absolutely.
we're in the hurry and they're stopping to look at the dandelion that's growing through the crack, or the ants that are dissecting the marshmallow and taking it piece by piece back to the anthill. And it is fascinating and it is wonderful and it brings them this amazement, and we're hustling them along. Now, obviously, there are things we have to get to. Like, I'm not saying we completely always follow the child's
Right.
pace. And yet, I think there is something to sometimes stopping and saying, let's just stop and look at this. Like,
Yeah.
let's just
Let's
pause
have
and
no
look at the
agenda.
sunset. Let's have no agenda. Let's explore a neighborhood in Houston we've never been to before.
Hmm.
Let's just wander somewhere without booking it on the itinerary. And for me, who's quite a type A personality, one of the people I spoke to in the book, a professor named Michael Roberto, he one of the things he said randomly was, if you take a family trip, don't schedule every second. Like, leave room for discovery. And of course, I had like a family trip set up. Like, first time taking my kids to California, I had everything down to the minute. And of course, we got to this aquarium and it was packed. And I have one kid who really doesn't like crowds. And so we like ditched it and we had this 3-hour gap. And so we just went wandering and we found this beach with sea lions on it. And I
Wow.
didn't know it was gonna be there. And it was like the best part of the vacation because we stumbled upon it. And so, part of that slowing down is just looking and saying, you know, which are these balls I'm juggling, which of these are plastic, and if they fall, it's no big deal, and which
Yep.
are glass, and if they fall,
Right.
it is a big deal, right? Like, there are some glass balls we're
Yes.
juggling, but sometimes if you really examine it, you look and say, maybe we don't have to do this. Like, maybe we can just stay home tonight, or maybe we can, you know, take a deep breath and say, is my child still loving this activity? Is it bringing out
Hmm.
their best self?
I like that visual of plastic balls and glass balls because, and I've never heard that before. I've talked about which balls can you drop, but
Yeah.
I love that. Which are the ones that when we really look at it, are going to be okay. Okay to
Hmm.
say, we don't have to stay on schedule here. We don't have to do this plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really
And
love
it's
that.
a
That's
relief to the kids sometimes too, where I'll say, you know what? We're just not going to do that. And I can see this, like, and my 13 will be like, are you sure that's okay? I was like,
yeah,
yeah, that is okay. And there've been a couple times where I said, you're actually just going to put your homework down. You're going to go to bed because, sleep is more of a glass ball than homework.
exactly.
Homework's
Ex-
plastic in this situation. Sleep is not.
That is lovely. So, what about the Embrace PDF?
So this is closely related to slowing down, and this is research out of Challenge Success, which is an organization at Stanford University, which really looks at what does it really mean to have successful kids and to be resilient. And one of the things they found is that, resilient, flourishing kids tended to have a pretty steady diet of P, D, and F, and that is playtime, downtime, and family time.
Mm,
And, and I think, I live in an area of Massachusetts where when these kids hit high school, everything's for the college resume, it feels like. And they don't always love that. I've worked and done a little college counseling, and it can feel really overwhelming. And when you start talking about downtime, playtime, right, and family time, you can almost see this like sigh of relief, right? These are protective. And so having some time where it's just, I can chill, like, that's good. And then that play, because play with kids is, it offers so much communication, right? Like, if you go out and shoot a few hoops with your kid or you get silly, right? Like, playtime is great for the little ones. I'm a big believer in, like, play is the work of childhood, but then we
absolutely.
forget that, like, our 17-year-old also needs to get silly with us too. And
Yep.
maybe we have a family card game night and we just have that. And then, family time, the family dinner, the family breakfast. Or maybe it's just, checking in before bed and sitting on their bed for a little while to chat. But a little bit of just consistent routine, check in time. These are all super protective for kids.
Okay, so the third one that I love how you stated this. Practice radical curiosity. So speak to that a little bit.
So this is a phrase I've taken from Robert Waldinger, who is a professor at Harvard, a psychiatrist who runs it's like the longevity center at Harvard. But they're known as basically like the happiness study. They spent 50 years tracking people that through surveys, through health exams, the same people, this huge cohort to see like what did make people thrive, right? And so he wrote this wonderful book called The Good Life, and I called him to interview him, and we were chatting. Wonderful guy, and he talks a lot in his book about this idea of radical curiosity. So when I said, what's your advice to parents based on the scads of research, he said, like, we really do need to practice radical curiosity, and he said, this is what I mean by that. Look at the person in front of you and really look at them and
Mm,
notice just one thing you didn't notice before. And it may be where their part is, it may be what shoes they're wearing. But he said so much of what happens in family life is that we fall into ruts where we assume, well, I've known you your whole life, I know you. And with our kids, they're changing so rapidly. And that can be hard for parents, especially these middle school years, right? Where your child may
absolutely.
change styles and interests and friend groups a dozen times. But the radical curiosity says, rather than kind of judging this or trying to control it, I'm just really curious about who my kid is. And I want to see, like, what lights them up? What gives them a
Mm,
spark? And what's not lighting them up anymore? Because often you're going to have a kid who's like, I am super into soccer. And then they're not, but they almost feel like they have to stay super into it because like mom and
yeah.
dad are
That's like
invested and they
been the
go to
thing.
those games every weekend and they're on a travel team now. The kids change and they're supposed to change. They're supposed to explore. And so part of the gift we give them is just to see them and to
Mm.
really try to pay attention to who they are, without trying to control who they are.
It's really made me want to step back and say, how often do I just go, I'm not even going to bring that up because I already know what's going to happen. Whereas
Hmm.
maybe that isn't going to happen. And maybe I need to remember people change, things change.
Yeah.
And there's always new things to discover about that person sitting in front of you.
Yeah, and I think one of the best ways to think about that as a parent is to remember when your baby was like a baby
Mm-hmm.
and how every little thing we were
Yes.
so excited about. Like, what does this mean? Like that word that this, is that a real word? Is it not? Oh my goodness, like they can suck their toes now. They couldn't do that before.
Right.
And like we have these like 12 to 14-year-olds whose brains are changing at the same pace of rapid development as birth to 3.
Yep.
And yet sometimes it's like instead of finding it fascinating, it's like, wait a second. Like, what do
Why?
you mean you want to cut your hair off? Like, what do you mean, you don't
Hmm.
want to do soccer anymore? And it's more of a like, and I taught middle school for years. So I remember parents coming in to say, like, what happened to my little girl, right? She's slamming the door on me now. And there can be that feeling of loss of the person I thought you were, you're suddenly changing. But that is the joy of middle school is that's part of it. They are so into their identity development that for me, watching my kid just go through that, she's almost done with 8th grade, has been honestly complete awe and wonder. Like watching her try to figure out what her interests are and to like lean into some and lean back from others. It's been super cool. Like, I'm like, this is a cool kid. And her interests now are not things I would have guessed 4 years ago.
I think it goes into number 4, which is become an awe seeker yourself,
Yeah.
because maybe as time goes on, we stop being looking for the awe in our
Mhm.
kids. And instead, we actually are, we have time constraints, we have work constraints, we have all these things that go, it's almost an annoyance when
Mhm.
things are different. It's almost like I
Mhm.
don't have time for that. I don't have the energy for that.
Mhm.
So, how do we become awe seekers as parents?
So one of the things I want my kids to remember about me is like I want them to know, and this goes back to a Mary Oliver poem that I love. She's a poet, and she
Mhm.
writes, "There's only one question: how to love this world."
Mm,
And like I want them to know that like I delight in this world, that I find beauty. I find beauty in people. I find beauty in the nature, because when the headlines are so overwhelming, it is
mhm.
so easy to get into a mindset that can be dark and can be just, filled with anxiety. And the thing I love about the emotion of awe is it's not an emotion designed to make things all better, right? It's this feeling we
Right.
have, just for your listeners, this is you. How do you know you're feeling awe? It's the goosebumps. It's when your
Mm,
eyes might fill with tears. It's when the only thing that comes out of your mouth is like, wow, like, oh, and it's involuntary, right? Like suddenly the whole audience sees something, and goes, oh, it's a
yeah.
sound. And for kids, it's these wide eyes, right? Their eyes get so wide. And these feelings, they don't require much of us, right? I sometimes think about something like gratitude, where sometimes it's a mental exercise like, okay, what is to be grateful for in this situation?
Right.
I'm going to sit and journal and I'm going to figure it out. Awe is reflexive, right? If we're paying attention, and we get goosebumps, that's an involuntary reflex. Like, I don't say, I am now going to have goosebumps. They just
Right.
happen. I hear a beautiful story on the radio, my eyes filled with tears. That is an automatic response. So, part of why I call it awe seekers is it's not that like I can force it on demand, but I can put myself in situations where I am more likely to feel it. Like, I can go on a walk without my earbuds, even though sometimes I want to listen to my book on tape, and that's great. But sometimes maybe I just listen to the birds.
Yeah.
Maybe I just look for the signs of spring, and if I am having a tough day, maybe I tick through those sources of awe that I've been researching all these years, art, music, community, and think like, what is something that, can I do that might put me more into that mindset that reminds me that the world is messy and wonderful. Like, right, like wonder
Yes.
and worry can coexist. So just yesterday I was it was just a busy day. It was really, really busy and was about 5 o'clock. And it was actually 60 degrees here, which is warm for April.
It's
And I
beautiful.
hadn't really exercised or gone out, and I didn't want to. Like I was just like there's dinner, there's laundry, but I'm keeping this odd journal every day now. So I was like, I gotta go on a walk. And so I went outside and I go and I run into my neighbors who have a 2-year-old and a 4-month old, and they were out. And I had my little cute dog, and the 2-year-old loves my dog, and she's kind of introverted, and every single time we meet, she's not sure she wants to touch the dog, and by the end, she's sitting on the ground petting him and snuggling.
Oh,
And, like, we stopped and chatted for 10 minutes, and I got to look at the sleeping baby, and I got to help the baby, and, you just all of these feelings of, like, the wonder of community and this cute child, and I thought, like, that it doesn't mean, like, all my worries of the day are gone, but it means my day included this. Like,
yeah.
it had all of these things,
It
and
was
it had this
messy
moment of
and
wonder
beautiful.
and awe and connection to a neighbor.
That's beautiful. I was going to tell you this. I wanted to make sure I remembered. So yesterday I was reading your book because we're talking today, and my daughter had a play date. There was another friend over here, and they were doing stuff around the house and having fun. And all of a sudden, they kind of wanted to do technology. They wanted to play a game on the Nintendo. And I was in the middle of reading your book, and I was like, "No, you know what? Let's go outside." So I took my computer because I'm reading it on the computer, which is funny because I love a good book, but I was like, I want to take this computer outside. So I sat in the grass and they played on the driveway. And it was just a really neat moment that it made me remember. Like, I know this in my head, but that's why books like this are so important to say, hey, remember,
Yeah.
like in the midst of your busy, in the midst of needing to get work done, or your kids aren't there to bother you. Like, let's be messy and beautiful and awe seekers together.
I say in every stage is an opportunity, and now that my kids are a little more independent at 11 and 13, I've been really trying to tap into some of my like, what is making me spark, right?
Yeah.
And so I've picked up 2 hobbies this year, which have nothing to do with my children and nothing
That's
to do with
awesome.
writing. I've started embroidering, which seemed
Very
like
cool.
my daughter laughs, is like it's a grandma hobby. But like I've also gotten super into like looking at embroidery as a kind of a cultural and almost, things that women do to preserve culture. Like there's a rich
Mm,
history. And then
hmm.
I started boxing because a friend asked me
That's
to go to a
awesome.
boxing class. And I was like, no. And I said no to her 4 times before I said yes. And then I just talked to my kids about it, right? Like we have these hobbies and interests, and it's okay to be able to like share with our kids, even if they pretend they're not interested. Your kids are always listening, always.
Totally. And I love that you're showing them too, like, it's never too late to reinvent, to find something else that brings you joy.
Yeah.
And we're so tied up in their lives sometimes. And I find this too. I love to read. And I just talked to my husband the other day about how finally in COVID, so I had my daughter in 2017.
Yeah.
So she was like around 3 when COVID, was happening. And finally, I felt like I picked up books again. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, and I felt like I found a piece of myself that had been gone. And we just slowed down. Something else I love that you do, I read in your book, it says, I started a practice I call something beautiful every day.
Mm-hmm.
I loved that.
Mm-hmm.
So is that in conjunction with your awe journal?
So that has turned into my awe journal.
Okay.
So it started in I was doing kind of sporadically. And then one of my very, very closest friends, and her story is a little bit in the book as well. She has a daughter my son's age, and her daughter developed leukemia. And it
Mm-hmm.
was just, and then it was remission, and it was back again. And it was long, long days in the hospital. And her daughter has Down syndrome. So that add the complication of her not always understanding what all of this was that was happening. And so I was feeling kind of apart, right? Because she lives in Wisconsin, I live in Massachusetts. So I started taking it, like sending her one beautiful thing every day, right? Could have been a poem, a picture, and then I'd often send it to my oldest as well, because why not? And that really got me looking for like what's something beautiful every day.
Mm.
And so, now, like, instead of just doing it as a photograph, I'm also and partly inspired by my grandmother, who kept a diary every day, but literally there were about 2 sentences each. There was one of those little
Wow.
appointment diaries, but we typed it all up, and it's a 400-page book of two
Wow.
sentences a day. And I thought, okay, well, what if I just did like 1 or 2 sentences a day? Maybe it's a photograph and nothing else. Maybe I write that I ran into my neighbor and sat and stroked our puppy, like, but something that gave me that feeling. And what I love about this practice is, one, it's super doable. Um, it's low pressure, but it's forming the habit of looking for something.
Yes.
And there's a story I told in my newsletter recently that in February it was so cold here, and my son had the flu, was out of school for 2 weeks, and it was a Monday, and he was home, so I was driving to pick up my daughter from school, and I was tired, and it was snowy, and I was running late, and I was feeling like I hadn't done anything with awe, so I was like,
Mhm.
and I was like, okay, why don't I just like pay attention as I drive? Who knows? Let's just
Right.
tune in. And then suddenly this like school bus pulls in front of me, which means it's going to be making 20 stops while I'm trying to drive.
I
And
try to avoid that with all that is within
oh
me.
yeah, but like that was the only way. It's like
But
a
the
straight road to the
yeah.
school. It's the only thing I
Oh.
could do. And we'd gone about 3 or 4 stops, and I look over and I see this beautiful dog, large dog, sitting at the top of a long driveway, like
Mm.
waiting. And the second his teenager got off the bus, this dog bolted down and just
Oh.
jumped on this kid who had a hoodie and who came off the bus kind of hunched over like, my day at school. And I saw the the kid just kind of, when you're kind of moving your face because your dog is looking you so hard
Yeah.
and smiling, and my eyes filled with tears, and I was like, okay, right, like
Mm.
it doesn't make my son better, it doesn't improve the weather, but I'm so glad I didn't miss that moment. And so
Yes.
I feel like that's the habit that I'm beginning to build through this research, which is why I say like this research is really changing probably my life more than my children's. But as
Mm.
it goes, when you change your life, you change your children's life, you know?
Absolutely. Right. Exactly. I think we are the biggest influencer, often that they have because they're seeing
Mhm.
us all the time. Well, what if the things that slowed us down are actually like the most important things, the things that make us pause?
Yes. That make us pause and look around and activate those senses and maybe notice one thing, right? One beautiful thing each day, just something
Mm.
beautiful.
So the chapters were broken down by finding awe in nature. Loved it. music, art, big questions, collective effervescence, the circle of life, and human kindness.
Mhm.
What is your favorite chapter?
That's impossible.
I agree. I kept thinking, oh, I'm not going to like anything more than the
Yeah.
nature one because that speaks to me.
Yeah.
And then I'd go to the next one. I'd be like, no, this is life changing. This is so important. Anyway.
So, okay. I'm going to say three, but for three different reasons. I really love the final chapter on the wonder of human kindness because I find that it so tremendously hopeful that when they do cross-cultural studies of where people find awe. So each one of these chapters is one of the core sources of awe, where
Mm,
people around the world, when they say they have this feeling, what was going on? Maybe they were in nature, maybe they were looking at art, music, etc. And the thing that brought people awe most frequently was seeing people's kindness and courage. It was human
mm,
goodness, that we have this capacity to be really moved by goodness. And so, part of the reason I love that chapter is because I got to tell a lot of stories,
mm.
and stories from other people. And then, of course, I had that feeling over and over again while I was writing that chapter of because somebody would tell me their story or I'd find somebody's story and it would go in there. I also really loved, although it was the most challenging chapter to write, the cycle of life,
Mm.
because one of the things they found is that awe is often found in endings and beginnings. And it's very easy with kids to talk about the awe of a little baby's toes. My daughter went to a farm this week and there were baby sheep, and like, just she showed me the videos, and they're the cutest things you've ever seen, right? She named them and they had on little strawberry vests because it was a little chilly. But it's not just life, it's also death and loss, right? People talk about, holding the hand of a loved one as they pass. And we have a hard time talking about death with kids.
Right.
And I think that's instinctive, like we want to shield. But I had this amazing opportunity while writing that chapter to go visit a Jewish day school
Mm.
that purposefully was built on the campus of a senior living center so that there's
Wow.
interaction. So when I went, and the kindergartners were playing outside, and there were seen, their elders walking back and forth, and they
Mm.
come and volunteer in the school. But what they do when they become eighth graders is they go and visit in the memory unit. And this is for people, these are the locked doors because people have Alzheimer's. And so they have to learn kind of how to interact, and they learn more about dementia and memory loss. And every year, some of these residents die. And
Yeah.
so, the rabbi, they talked about how do you talk about that? And these kids were so amazing with these. And one of them said, we don't call it service, like it's fun. We go and visit.
Mm.
And to see them interact, and even though week to week the residents didn't remember them, the staff said every time these kids come, the rest of the day is easier. Like
Wow.
they eat better, the residents are more cooperative, like there's a joy and a light that comes with this kind of, connection. And it was just one of the most moving experiences I've had spending that day, kind of shadowing, and thinking about how do we connect kids intergenerationally, right?
Hmm.
Like with grandparents, with older neighbors, with younger people, so that our high schooler can, hold a baby and remember and feel that feeling. Because it's very easy for our teens to get hyper focused on their immediate peer group. And I
Absolutely.
think, our loneliest generations are young adults and elderly. And like, if we can figure out how to creatively pair that, so that one. And then I also, because I was a career teacher, the big ideas chapter just got me super excited about like,
Yes.
how can we use awe and wonder as a tool to help kids learn? Because
Yes.
awe and wonder increase curiosity, and curiosity increases motivation and retention of material. So that was fun too.
I love so many of those pieces because I also feel like what you were saying with the cycle of life and human kindness, they're all kind of intertwined, and they're also intertwined with the awe of community and
Hmm.
belonging.
Yeah.
And if we can do that, and if we can instill that in our children where they really know I belong,
Hmm.
it changes the world. It just really
Hmm.
changes the world. Um,
This is the stuff that reminds kids of, like, not to sound over dramatic, but this is the stuff that makes us human, right? It's
Yes.
capacity to imagine, to dream, to feel this wonder, to feel this amazement. And it, the ability to pause and look at the stars, like that just puts us back in touch with let me put it this way. One of my favorite findings about awe is that when experiencing awe makes us more humble. And I think
Yes.
humility is a misunderstood virtue, because one of the things it does is it puts us in touch with what researchers call our small self. Meaning sometimes we make ourselves so large and we're the center of the story, so that if we get rejected by a love interest or we don't get the A on the test, right, our world is collapsing.
Yeah.
But if you don't get that A on the test and then you go outside and you see a meteor shower, or a cute 2-year-old comes over and sits on your lap and thinks you're the greatest thing ever, it suddenly makes, like, the test seem a little less important. Like, it puts
Yeah.
you in touch with those bigger pictures. Um, I chatted with a high schooler at a very high achieving school, but they have a child study center at the high school, and so he gets to go and hang out with 4-year-olds, and he says this is his favorite hour of the day because he's not thinking about his calculus test, he's not thinking about his AP history project, he's thinking about, like, how to color this tree with this kid and how to help them learn how to tie their shoes. And it just puts him in touch again with that kind of small stuff that in the scheme of things, you know, I am small and that's beautiful because
Yeah.
this is such a big, beautiful world. So my problems, they are real, but they're not the whole world.
I loved your story at the beginning of the book where your dad took you out to see stars.
Yeah.
And it reminded me so much of my childhood because my dad was very much like that. So he grew up Amish in Pennsylvania and grew up on the farm, and then they moved to Guatemala. So that's where I grew up. And they were missionaries. And so lived in the jungles and those kinds of things. But he was such a good awe seeker. And we would be on long road trips and he would be like, let's stop and go see what the cotton feels like, or let's stop and
Mhm.
get a piece of sugar cane and like smell it and taste it.
I feel like in so many ways this book is like kind of a love letter to my dad. And you got to realize, like, I think much like your situation, if you look at like what parents should do according to today's parenting standards, my dad hit almost none of them, right? And in fact,
Exactly.
even now I look back and, like, he was not good about talking about his feelings. He was not super communicative in general, but he was endlessly curious. Like,
Mm,
he was the most curious person I have ever met. He just kept teaching himself stuff, and then he wanted to teach us. And what he did, I think, so beautifully was he got fascinated by my interests,
mm.
because he loved ideas. And so when I decided that I was really interested in Japan, because I went to go visit my cousins who were living there, when I was 14. And I came back and he had checked out this book from the library on how to make sushi at home. Now, I grew up in a town that had no Japanese restaurants. And we didn't know what we were doing. We had to like mail order out for sushi for like seaweed, right? And and we were using like canned tuna, but it's such a fun memory. I feel like that gave me so much that I kinda, like, wanna say to, like, the fathers who are unsure about other things is, like, if you can spark that curiosity just by, taking them with you when you go to the store or the farmer's market, taking them with you on a camping trip, like, those things are gonna feed your kids for life.
In Child Builders, it's a nonprofit in Houston. So we are all about prevention. So we write curriculum to go in and talk to kids about abuse and safety and kind words and then we have some social and emotional learning curriculum that goes off of that. And so we talk a lot about prevention, preventing abuse, preventing trauma, or healing from that. And so there was a piece that really tied in. So much of this tied in because we also talk a lot about being mindful and having empathy, and this book ties beautifully with both of those, all of that. But there was one thing that I read. It says there's evidence that toxic stress of any kind, loss, abuse, community violence, can affect the structure of the developing brain, leading to struggles with learning, self-regulation, and physical and mental health, which
Mhm.
child builders, obviously, there's a lot of
Mm,
research, but it says, so whether your kids are experiencing significant challenges or those inevitable smaller struggles, art is one additional resource you can employ to support them. And I just love that. I love that. And most of the chapters, spoke into that. Like,
mm.
we have these life events, whether, we wanted them to happen, we didn't, we just do. We have trauma, we have stress. But things like art, nature, music can actually support brain health.
Yeah. I mean, I'm fascinated that so many of these sources of awe are also things that are often utilized in therapy, right? There's
Mhm.
research about green space and how, being in nature. I describe in the book the whitewater rafting trips that this researcher took with combat veterans and high schoolers who experience community violence, and how the marker of cortisol in their saliva went down, and even 6 weeks later they had greater feelings of hope and wellness. You see that with kind of art therapy, and how when you take people who struggle with health issues and they are doing art, like, it has protective measures. Music. I have a story in there about one of my former students who's studying to be a music therapist, and the way music can kind of speak to us in a way other things can't. And so I'm not surprised that the sources of awe are also kind of sources of healing. All of these things that I think it's beautiful that beautiful things are good for us.
Yes. I There's these protective factors that we talk a lot about, but I really think these need to be added into those protective factors, putting ourselves in the way of beauty, in the
Yeah.
way of awe-inspiring moments, because things are going to happen. They happen to all of
Mhm,
us, and they're hard, and life is hard. And what if stepping outside of that a little bit can help heal? And
mhm.
that's a really amazing thing.
It's a life is hard and not a life is hard, right? But you
Yes.
should look on the bright side. This is not toxic
Right.
positivity. This is life is hard. And I just heard the first, bluebird of the season, the, red winged
Mm,
blackbird of the season come back. Like, life is hard and the daffodils are blooming. And
mm.
so it's both. And it I think it reminds us that when we feel these goosebumps, is that we are big enough to feel multiple things at once, and
Yes.
that's a good lesson for our kids too, right? This a mixed emotion that you can be sad, you can be disappointed, and I don't need to wish it away for you, right? We might want to, and you can also, come with me to help somebody next door. And
Yeah.
we can also have some playtime as a family, in the midst of this.
That's such a good reminder for me as a parent to take the difficult moments and, like you said, not wish them away or say, let's put a band-aid on it, but like, man, we can feel all
Hmm.
the things. I think my favorite quote, I actually wrote it down, um, because we're almost out of time, but I loved this quote. The most common source of awe is witnessing other people's goodness. Moral virtue is inspiring. And I know we talked about that a bit, about kindness, which is a huge part of what Child Builders does, and we teach that words matter, kindness matters.
I think we're here to love each other and to figure out how to be good to each other. And well, I think that as parents, we know we want that. We don't always say it out loud to our kids that that's what we want.
Yes.
And that was another finding from Challenge Success, was that they asked parents, what do you want most for your kids? And they said things like, I want them to be healthy and happy and kind and da da. And they asked the kids, what do your parents want most for you? And they said, good grades, good college admissions.
Yep.
And there was this huge gap. And it's not, and most of it is that, like, we forget sometimes that what we really need to be reminding our kids is, I'm so proud of you because, you didn't yell at your brother tonight, even though you had a right to.
Yeah.
He was
Right.
bothering you. And that was huge. And you are such a good friend. And I'm really proud of you for that.
One thing that was amazing to me when I was reading this was how many practical examples you gave. Like, each chapter was like, here's 5 things, or 6 things, 7 things that you can do with your kids today to bring the awe of nature in, or to bring art in, or, kindness. And as a parent and educator, I really appreciate that.
Oh, thanks. That was
So,
the teacher in me going, all right, here's
yes,
the theory, and now here's some practical application.
absolutely. And parents could use that. And honestly, educators in classrooms, here are 5 things today to help your students see beauty in nature, or the beauty in being a community. Anyway, so I really was so grateful for that, and loved the book, like I said. And I always finish podcasts by saying, if there's one thing you would want people to walk away with today, what is that?
Mm. I think it's the reminder that when you cut away all the messages of the big things we need to be doing or to be successful parents, that sometimes if you can just have that moment where you were standing outside together and looking at the stars, don't underestimate those small memories for
Mm,
children decades later,
mm,
because I think you probably will have a few of those small memories from your own childhood. And it's not necessarily the grand trip if that's not something you can do for your family, but it's that card game, it's that sunset, it's those stars, and those things are going to feed your kids in incredible ways.
that's lovely. Don't underestimate the small things.
Yeah.
Love it. Well, I so enjoyed this. Thank
This
you
was
so
great, Priscilla.
much.
Thank you.
You were great. And yeah, like I said, I was kind of like a big fan. So I was like, yay, I get to talk to you. I'm so excited. Thank you so much for joining us today on Building Pathways to Healthy Minds. I hope you found this conversation with Deborah Farmer Chris as enriching and heartwarming as I did. Her reminder to embrace the small, awe filled moments with our children, like watching stars or sharing a beautiful moment, is something I know will stay with me, and I hope it stays with you too. If today's episode resonated with you, I'd be so grateful if you'd share it with a friend, leave a review or comments or questions, and subscribe so you don't miss the next conversation. And don't forget, Deborah's beautiful new book, Raising Awe Seekers, is out on May 27th, and it is truly a gift for any parent, caregiver, or educator. Until next time, stand strong, stay safe, and I hope you have a wonderful day.